So I have to be quiet.
This is 7-2, part 2. I started to see if we remember how to factor a binomial, and you can do the same thing for a trinomial, where you find the GCF. It goes on the outside of the parentheses, and then whatever's left over, once we divide, like 15a divided by 5a is 3, for instance, our leftovers go in the parentheses, and we can check our work by distributing this, and the directions for these problems will read factor. This whole chapter basically is going to be about factoring. We started with prime factorization, which is our prime numbers being factored, and now we're factoring out for binomials, trinomials, polynomials, etc. So when we have a 4-term polynomial, we're going to use a new method called factor by grouping. The directions will just say factor, so you're going to have to look at that problem and say, oh, well, there's 4 terms here, so I'm going to use factor by grouping. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we need to find the GCF of each of these groups that we just made. Now, factor by grouping means we're going to group 2 terms together and another 2 terms together, and we're going to factor each group. So 12a cubed and negative 9a squared, the GCF of these is going to be 3a squared. That would go on the outside of the parentheses. And remember, factoring is division. So if you're not going to make a list of all of the factors and see what's left over, then you would just divide. So I want you guys to try to divide these. 12 divided by 3 gets us 4. A cubed divided by a squared, well, we just took 2 of the a's away. It's actually just subtraction, really, of the exponents. When you divide, we subtract the exponents. Like when we multiply, we add the exponents. So 3 minus 2 is 1, so that's a to the first. Shh. And I'm putting my negative here. And 9 divided by 3 is 3. And a squared divided by a squared, well, that's a to the 0, so it just cancels that out, because anything to the 0 power is 1. So we're going to put 3 here. Okay, so now that I've taken the GCF out of both of my binomials and writing my leftovers in parentheses, I am now going to write my final answer, which means I'm going to look for twins, meaning my 2 binomials that came out the same. It doesn't matter the order that you write them, but you can write your twins first if you want to. You only write it 1 time. And then you take your leftovers, those weren't leftovers, your GCFs, and those go in the next group. So the first group is twins. Again, the order doesn't matter, so you could write the GCFs first, but my first group here was twins, and my second group was my GCFs, plural. You can check your work by either using FOIL or some method of multiplication, because factoring is division, so we check by multiplying. So here's another example of what we just did. I already put in the parentheses for us, but they wouldn't normally be there. When there's 4 terms, we are going to make sure we're using factoring by grouping, even though the problem will just say to factor. You have to know that because there's 4 terms. So go ahead and try this problem, and we'll put the answer up after. The final answer is 3b plus 4 times 2b squared plus 3. Okay, if we have a subtraction in here when we're factoring by grouping, we want to keep that subtraction sign with the number it goes with. So that subtraction is really a negative 8. So when I group, I'm going to keep the negative with the 8. But because this can't be multiplication, that wouldn't be a polynomial, I need to put my addition symbol back in here. Plus a negative is the same thing as minusing a number. And from there, everything's the same. So I'm going to find the GCF of both of my groups and write my final answer after that.